بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والمتصل ما سلم إسناده من سقوط فيه بحيث يكون كل من رجاله سمع ذلك المروي من شيخه، والسند تقدم تعريفه. والمعلل لغة ما فيه علة، واصطلاحا ما فيه علة خفية قادحة. والشاذ لغة المنفرد، واصطلاحا ما يخالف فيه الراوي من هو أرجح منه. We were explaining the 5 conditions for a narration to be classified as sahih لذاته. We explained quite a bit regarding the first 2 conditions, which are adl and dhabt. With regards to the remaining 3 conditions, Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah does bring dedicated chapters for them later. So here inshallah we'll just go very quickly through the text, and we will discuss them when we come to the relevant chapters. So we can inshallah try to complete all 3 conditions today. Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, well, Muttaṣil, that when speaking about the conditions for a narration to be sahih lidhati, then he said that it must be Muttaṣil. So what is the meaning of Muttaṣil? Ma salima isnaduhu min suqutin fihi, that the chain should be free from any drop in it. That how there should be no drop, there should be no missing link. بحيث يكون كل من رجاله سمع ذلك المروي من شيخه, in such a way that every person heard from his sheikh. Now from this entire sentence, I only want to comment on the one word that Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimullah used. So he used the word sami'a, that the person heard from his sheikh. He's saying that every person should hear the narration from the narrator above him. This is how he phrases it. And the reason why he phrases it like this is because this was the popular method of obtaining a hadith. That when a student wanted a hadith, then he would go to the sheikh, and the sheikh would verbally tell him the narration. So he, as the student, he would hear the narration. But this here was not the only method of obtaining a hadith. There were other methods as well. If a person wanted a hadith, then there were other ways that he could get the hadith. For example, عرض على الشيوخ, and this is where the student reads and the teacher listens. So here the student is not listening, rather the student is the one who is reading the narration. Likewise, you get Ijāzah. So in Ijāzah, the sheikh is just giving permission, he's authorizing that particular person to quote the narration from him. No one is hearing any narration. And these are all valid ways of obtaining a hadith. So therefore, rather than using the word sami'a, which is restricted and confined to just one method of obtaining a narration, the author should have rather used a word that encompasses all the valid methods of obtaining a narration. So it would have been better if he used a word like talaqqa, or he used a word like akhadha, and then he added words like وغيره من طرق التحمل المعتبرة, that talaqqa, he received the narration from the sheikh, or and other methods which were considered as valid ways of obtaining a narration. Al-Malaqani rahimahullah, he writes in Qada al-Watar, it's on page 647, الظاهر أن ذكر السماع وقع على سبيل التمثيل. That is very apparent that here when he used the word sami'a, then this here is that he's just giving one example. والمراد أن يكون هناك تحمل عن شيخه بوجه من وجوه التحمل سماعا كان أو غيره. The objective is that there must be a valid tahammul from the sheikh, in from any of the valid ways in making tahammul, any of the valid ways of obtaining a narration from the sheikh, whether it is through hearing the narration from the sheikh, or whether it is through the other methods like I gave you the example of ard or ijazah, etc. Now here we are speaking about ittisal in the chain. So that means there must be no missing link in the chain of transmission. So there must be no missing link from the one who is narrating it right up until the Prophet ﷺ. If it is a marfu' narration, and we'll explain the word marfu'. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah explains it actually right towards the end. That means when a narration links to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it is termed as marfu'. Or it reaches up to the Sahabi. There must be no missing links up to the Sahabi if it is a mawquf narration, or any person who the person is quoting. There should be no missing links up to that person. But with regards to missing links, sometimes it could be that there is only one link that is missing, only one person is dropped off. At other times there could be two missing links in one chain. Then if there are two, it could be that they are consecutive, or maybe they are not consecutive. Sometimes the missing links could be from the author of the kitab. At other times it could be on the other end of the chain. So there are separate terminologies for all of these, and some might even have different rulings. So the author does bring dedicated chapters for each of these, and therefore we will discuss each of those separately under the relevant chapters, inshallah. And then Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, وَالسَّنَدُ تَقَدَّمَ تَعْرِيفُهُ, that the definition of sanad has already been mentioned. Now thus far, until what we done, if you remember on page 41, the author said, وَالْإِسْنَادُ حِكَايَةُ طَرِيقِ الْمَتْنِ. So he previously defined the word isnad. He did not define the word sanad. And if you remember, we discussed his definition in a lot of detail there. We mentioned that the muhaddithun of the past, they would commonly say هذا إسناد صحيح. So he explained that al-isnad حكاية طريق المتن, that isnad means relating the pathway of that text. But when the muhaddithun of the past use the word هذا إسناد صحيح, then it does not mean that they are commenting on the action, that they are not saying that this action of transmitting the chain is correct. Rather, isnad comes in the meaning of sanad. So this here is proof that the author is also using the word sanad in the meaning of isnad. He's using sanad and isnad, is considering both of these terms as synonyms. Because previously, what did he explain? He explained isnad. And now when he's speaking, what does he say? That وَالسَّنَدْ تَقَدَّمَ تَعْرِيفُهُ. So he's saying that the definition has already passed, and the only place that he can be referring to is that place where he spoke about isnad, isn't it? So therefore, according to the author, we can see that isnad and sanad has the same meaning. Allama Baqa'i rahimahullah, he mentioned الظاهر من استعمالهم عدم الفرق, that the way it's very apparent when the muhaddithun use the word isnad and when they use the word sanad, they do not create any distinction. They would not take into consideration that the one is from bab if'al, and therefore it refers to the act of relating. And then he says, وَقَوْلُهُ هَذَا يَدُلُّ عَلَيْهِ, that yeah, the fact that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is using the word sanad, and then he is saying that we already defined it, and he's referring to the place where he defined the word isnad. This clearly denotes that there is no difference between sanad and isnad. حيث جعل تعريف الإسناد هو تعريف السند. Moving to the next condition, he says, وَالْمُعَلَّلْ لُغَةً ما فيه علة واصطلاحا ما فيه علة خفية قادحة. So just like how he mentioned about Muttaṣil, there's also a dedicated chapter concerning this term mu'allal, and that's on page 92. So therefore he explains the istilahi meaning in just 6 words. So the lughwi meaning is, he says ma fihi illah, that it is that which has a defect. Mu'allal, the linguistic meaning is that which has a defect. وَاصْطِلَاحٌ مَا فِيهِ عِلَّةٌ خَفِيَّةٌ قَادِحَةٌ, is that which has a defect that is hidden and it's defamatory. That means it has an impact. So this here is the most difficult from all the various sections of ulumul hadith. That's not everyone's cup of tea to find defects, hidden defects, and difficult defects within a narration. Only those who are experts, they will be able to discover these defects and notice the hidden and concealed problems in the narration. So we'll discuss more about this on page 92 under the chapter, but for now we can just confine ourselves strictly to what the author mentioned here. So like we said, that with regards to the literal meaning, he said that it is ma fihi illah, that it is that which has a defect. And then in for the technical meaning, he's saying ma fihi illatun khafiyyatun qadiha. So he's using the word illah. Those of you who are good in Arabic, you will know that the maf'ul ought to be brought on thulathi mujarrad, isn't it? So because he's using the word illah, it would have been more correct for him to say ma'lul instead of mu'allal. But because he's using the terminology of the muhaddithun, therefore he uses the word mu'allal from bab taf'il. And here in the technical meaning, he is saying that the illah is such that it's khafiyya and it is qadiha, that it's a hidden defect and it's having an impact. Now in his definition of sahih lidhati on the previous page, he just wrote that the narration should not be mu'allal. And the same is in an-Nukhbah. He did not add any sifa. He did not mention in the definition, and he did not mention in the main text that it must be khafiyya and qadiha. Here is mentioning it rather as a terminology. So both of these terms are very crucial and very important. The word khafiyya means to be hidden. That if the defect is apparent, then there are other dedicated terms which are used. We will not consider that narration to be mu'allal. And if it is qadiha, it means that it really causes the narration to become weak. So the word qadiha demonstrates to us that if there is a defect, but the defect does not have any impact on the narration, then it does not affect the authenticity of the narration. So if there's an illah and it is not qadiha, then that slight defect is overlooked. Alam al-Qani rahimahullah, he gives an example. He says, كَإِبْدَالِ ثِقَةٍ بِثِقَةٍ. So say you have a narrator quoting via Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Now Sufyan ibn Uyayna is a reliable narrator. His student then mistakenly changes it to Sufyan al-Thawri, who's Amirul Mu'minin fil Ḥadīth. Now here he's changing the teacher's teacher. So he's making a mistake. There is a defect. But because both of them are reliable, it's not going to affect the authenticity. So despite the presence of an illah, and you can see that here it's changing the whole identity of the person, but the narration will still be authentic. Why? Because both the narrators encompass the first two conditions of adl and tamud dabt. So the defect is no more taken into consideration, and therefore the narration will still be authentic. Or take the example that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah gave in his Nukat. He say, yarwi al-adlu dabit, that you have a person who fulfills the condition of adl and dabit. He is a thiqa narrator. He is narrating an tabi'iyyin mathalan an sahabiyyin hadithan, quoting a tabi'i who is quoting one sahabi. So say for example Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. فَيَرْوِيهِ عَدْلٌ ضَابِطٌ غَيْرُهُ. Then you have another person who is also thiqa and he is on par with this narrator, مساو له في عدالته وضبطه وغير ذلك من الصفات العلية عن ذلك التابعي بعينه. And he is quoting from that exact same tabi'i, but he is taking the name of another sahabi. He is saying that this tabi'i narrated it from Anas radiyallahu anhu. فَإِنَّ مِثْلَ هَذَا يُسَمَّى عِلَّ عِنْدَهُم. Then this definitely it's a defect, because you're not quoting precisely which sahabi he is narrating from. لِوُجُودِ الْإِخْتِلَافِ عَلَى ذَلِكَ التَّابِعِيِّ فِي شَيْخِهِ. One of them will be correct. وَلَكِنَّهَا غَيْرْ قَادِحَةٌ. But this here does not impact the authenticity of the narration. Why? لِجَوَازِ أَن يَكُونَ التَّابِعِيُّ سَمِعَهُ مِنْ صَحَابِيَّيْنِ مَعًا. That probably he heard it from both of the Sahaba. Maybe the same tabi'i heard it from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu an, and he heard it from Anas radiyallahu an. Or even if this narrator is making a mistake, all the Sahaba are reliable, and therefore it does not impact the authenticity of this narration. An important point to also note here is that when he uses this word khafiyya, then this does not mean that you must now take a mafhum mukhalaf here, that ilal zahira are accepted because apparent defects are already detected and excluded because of the previous three conditions. That what are the previous three conditions? The first was adl, that the person must be adil. So if a person is not adil, then already there the narration is going to be kicked out from this definition of sahih. Okay, say maybe he is an adil narrator. Then the second condition is tamud dabt. So illa zahira is if the person has a weak memory. If a person has a weak memory, then it's already being excluded by that condition. The third condition is chain must be continuous. If there is a broken link, there's a missing link, then it's already now no more from the definition of Sahih لذاته. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he says وإنما قيد بذلك لأن الظاهرة راجعة إلى ضعف الراوي, that if the narrator is weak أو عدم اتصال السند وهو محترز عنه بما تقدم. And another explanation is that if the defect is hidden and yet it impacts the narration, then if it is apparent, then all the more reason it will bring down its status. Al-khafiyya إذا أثرت فالجلية أولى. That's what Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah mentions here. So here, firstly, to give you an example of an apparent defect of a illa zahira. So say you have an open sana who is narrating a hadith, or you have a narrator who is quoting a sheikh from a completely different era. Like you have a person who was born a century or two later, he is narrating from a sheikh who passed away 100 or 200 years before he could even be born. So these are apparent defects. The minute you look at this narration, you will understand that this narration cannot be authentic. So anyone can easily pick up the problems from these chains, isn't it? So this here is considered as illa zahira. As for illa khafiyya, remember I just told you that only an expert will be able to detect it. So an example of this here is you have a narrator quoting from a sheikh who he met, and he even heard other narrations from him. So say he heard 10 narrations from him. Now he is quoting an 11th narration from the same sheikh. So he did not hear this narration from the sheikh. He heard 10 other narrations and is quoting an 11th narration that he did not hear. So this one specific narration he did not hear, but he is using such words when quoting it that it has a dual meaning. It could be that he heard from the sheikh, or it could be that he did not hear from the sheikh. For example, he uses the word an. He's not clearly mentioning that he did not hear this particular narration from the sheikh. So now, how are you going to know that he didn't hear this particular narration from the sheikh? Because he heard those other narrations from the sheikh. So only an expert and a master of hadith, he will be able to pick up this and he will detect this. Yes, there are factors which they consider and a whole lot of points that they look. Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he mentioned some of the ways that would assist them in unveiling these hidden defects. He says, وَتُدْرَكُ الْعِلَّةِ بِتَفَرُّدِ الرَّاوِي بِذَلِكَ الْحَدِيثِ. Sometimes you will find that it's only this particular person who is narrating this narration. وَعَدَمِ الْمُتَابَعَةِ. No one else is giving him support. No one else is narrating it. وَبِمُخَالَفَةِ غَيْرِهِ. Maybe you look at the fact that how come everyone else is narrating something in contrast to what he is narrating. مع قرائن تنبه العارف على وهم بإرسال في موصول. That it will inform the expert that here there is definitely some mess up. This here is not an authentic narration. أو وقف في مرفوع أو دخول حديث في حديث. Maybe he's incorporating one hadith with another narration. He's confusing two narrations, etc. So here when what Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah mentions, it reminds me about the Hanafi view, that for Hanafis, we weaken narrations because of these types of defects. Now you know how it works. Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, he came and he mentioned those 5 conditions for a narration to be sahih. You remember we said that from where did he derive those conditions? From the definition of Imam Muslim rahimahullah. But Hanafis, Obviously, they were writing usul from the time of Allama Jassas al-Razi, and he came centuries before Allama Ibn Salah rahimullah. So our usul has already documented long before all of these usul could be put to paper. But what we are doing, we are grouping our usul and making it blend and conform to what Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah wrote. So for example, if you look here, what we regard as defects. So now rather than giving other terminologies and mentioning different definitions for them, and it will make you more confused, we are accepting this definition of mu'allal. And under the definition of mu'allal, we are adding all these kind of defects. So some examples of factors that we use and consider as ilal. You have a single individual who is narrating something that everybody should know. So for example, if you only have one person who is narrating something that took place publicly, like in Salah, or something that happens frequently, but only one person is narrating it. So how come this here happens so much? How come no other Sahabi has narrated it? Or you have one narrator who is quoting something and then he's claiming that it's faraz, it's obligatory. Now obviously for it to be obligatory, it means that everyone would have to know about it, because it was the duty of the Prophet ﷺ to teach everyone, isn't it? So how can it be that only one person knows about this? So that's an example of an illah. So Hanafis will say that no, we cannot accept this narration because of this. Likewise, another example, that it's proven that the very same Sahabi who is narrating the hadith, he practiced in contrast to that narration. So would a Sahabi ever contradict the Prophet ﷺ? So if he's it could be that there is a narrator who is misquoting the Sahabi. So you can see, yeah, it could be mansukh. In this case, it will be sahih. Or it could be ma'lul, that maybe one of the narrators in the chain, they are making a mistake, and maybe that Sahabi did not mention that it's haram. So it's just being quoted from him, it's being attributed to him that he mentioned that it's haram, but in reality he did not mention it's haram. So that is a hidden defect. Another example is that you have all the senior companions, they are practicing in contrast to what is transmitted. Again, here it could be that it's mansukh, or it could be, there are different ways of looking at it. One way is that probably could be a mu'allal narration, that probably the narrators below are making a mistake. Now a question arises here, that if these qualities of khafiyya and qadiha, they are so essential, they are so important, then why did the author not mention them in the definition? And why did he not mention them in the original text in Nukhbatul Fikr? Because remember, when he was writing Nukhbatul Fikr, he didn't know that he's going to be writing Nuzha an-Naḍar later on. So the answer to this here is that for the term khafiyya, this applies to a person who is not an expert. Because the defect is going to be apparent for the expert, isn't it? Then only he can mention that it has this defect. So this whole quality of khafiyya, of being hidden, it's applying to a person who is not an expert. لا يخفى أن المراد بخفاء العلة الخفية إنما هو بالنظر لعدم المتبحر في هذا الفن. وإلا فهي لديه ظاهرة قضاء الوتر, page 675. An expert, it will be apparent for him, and that is how he was able to detect it. So you'll see later on, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he will give an example of a jewala. So if me and you, if we have to look at tungsten, then we will assume that it's original gold. If someone shows us a moissanite, we will assume that this here is a real diamond. A person can even be deceived by this here. He can pay thousands of dollars, meantime he's buying a moissanite which is only $10. So if you have to take these to an expert jeweler, then he will just look at it and he will immediately notice that these are all fake. So in the same way, for those who are not advanced in the field of hadith, apparently the narration will seem perfect for them. So for them, any defects which are there, it will be khafiyya. Unless it's like very apparent, like I mentioned to you, that where you have a person who is quoting from someone who came 100, 200 years earlier. But if there are other defects, then it will appear that they are hidden. But an expert and those who are dedicated in the day and the night in this field, they will easily detect the problems with this report. So for them, everything will be zahira. In fact, an expert jeweler, he can be deceived. That sometimes maybe the jeweler, although all the time he's seeing gold, probably he could be deceived, and he could also mistake a Mazanite to be an original diamond. But for the experts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make, for the experts of Hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make everything very clear for them. Why? Because this is the only way that they will be able to preserve his religion. And this here is also an important point to always keep in mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is divinely protecting a hadith. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He assists the muhaddithin with detecting errors and grading narrations accurately. Because remember that ultimately it is the responsibility of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect this deen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took it upon himself to preserve this sharia. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just using the muhaddithin as the means, but ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who will make sure that authentic narrations are passed on from generation to generation, and nothing is falsely attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and thereafter regarded as part of deen. So all this was with regards to the word khafiya, why the author did not have to mention the word khafiya emphatically in his definition or in the original text. Then with regards to the word qadiha, so it is clear from the term illah. What's the meaning of illah? It means a defect. So from this very term, from the term itself, it means that it is qadiha, it's going to impact the narration. So, if there is an illah which is bringing down the status of that narration, then it's no more going to be sahih. So, there's no need for any additional description. Allama Munawi rahimahullah, he quoted the author as saying, وَلَمْ يُصِبْ مَنْ قَالَ لَا حَاجَةَ إِلَى ذَلِكَ لِأَنَّ لَفْظَ الْعِلَّةِ لَا يُطْلَقُ إِلَّا عَلَى مَا كَانَ قَادِحًا. When they use the word illah, then it automatically means that it is a qadiha. So this here is with regards to the fourth quality of, the fourth condition for a narration to be graded as sahih. Then the fifth is shadh. So the author mentions this. I thought that we'll go through it all in today's lesson, but there is a few points to discuss with regards to it. So inshallah we'll leave that for the next session, inshallah. So in this 1 minute remaining, if any of you have questions, then you can ask. Oh, no one has any questions? So don't be shy, that a person who's shy, he will be deprived of knowledge. So inshallah we have this time. And if you go over the 1 minute, maybe you might be thinking that you have a question which is so intricate that we'll go over, then that's fine. Okay, you'll ask it on WhatsApp. So yeah, so no problem. If there are no questions, then we can conclude the lesson here, inshallah, and then we'll continue. We'll explain shad in the next lesson. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.